Hi, in this video we are going to learn about how to make a rent or buy decision for a home. So let's say you have a $1.25 million home that you want to buy and you're willing to put down 20% down payment, and you assume that the home appreciates every year by 5%, and the bank is willing to give you a 2.5% APR monthly compounding mortgage for 30 years fixed. And you have some idea of what is the insurance, what is the property tax, it's typically around 1 to 1.2%, and your homeowners association fees. So I've assumed $300 for HOA, $500 for your monthly insurance, and 1% of your monthly equivalent for your property tax. And we can rent a similar apartment or a similar home for, let's say, $4,500. And you assume that your rents will also increase by the similar amount as your home appreciates by 5%, right? And that there is a closing cost for home. So when the seller sells, they pay typically 2.5% to the buyer's agent and the seller's agent. So there's a one time you have to assume for the 5% of this home value is just like fees of just doing that transaction. So if you have these 8 things, then that's it. Then you can use this thing called an NPV, which is net present value, to find out if this is a good decision financially or if it's not a good decision financially. But the key is to get these 8 items really well. The list price, this is trivial to get because this is what the person who's selling the home to you is telling you clearly. And this, you will absolutely know how much money you have in the bank, what percentage. This calculation of how the home has appreciated, you can do it by actually looking at similar homes and find out over the last 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, how the home has appreciated. So in this case, I took this example, which is this apartment, which just got sold like a few days back. 2 bed, 2 bath, 1.25 million. And then I also looked at its historical, the same unit was sold for what price. When you do that, you can actually find out that, hey, this unit was bought in 2004, and if you take a longer period of time, like from 2004 to 2021, so similar unit went from 700,000, 772,000 to 1.25 million. So you can actually find out the CAGR. It basically tells you that, hey, this is 3.2% improvement every year for the next 16 years, 15, 16 years. So that gives you like a very good idea of like, hey, similar apartments. I did the same thing with this unit, which was started at 2014 to 2021. You get like similar, like 2 to 3%. So once you know how much your home appreciates, so you need to know this. This is the most complex part. How do you anticipate how much it will appreciate? Because if you go down by 3%, that has a big impact. So once you know how much you expect your home to appreciate, and this is easy because the bank will clearly tell you based on your credit, what percentage loan can you get. And this also is clear, right? How much your HOA currently is. It's not clear how much they'll increase your HOA every month, but let's assume that this is the bare minimum you have to pay. Insurance is very easy. Property tax, it's fixed. And this is also easy. You can find out how much the monthly rents are for a competitive place if you want to rent instead of buy. And again, like the home appreciation, again, rent increases. These are the 2 most difficult things to calculate. If you have these 2, number 4 and number 8, line item 4 and line item 8, that's it. Then it's very easy. If you can forecast if the home appreciates, but this is slightly easier this is harder. How much is the rent's going to increase? But this one. But you can, for simplicity, just assume if once you've calculated the home appreciation, just put the same number for rent appreciation. So I think that's the key. But this is also not difficult. We just saw how we can find out historically how the home has appreciated. And if you use a long enough average, then you can do this. So this is not that difficult as to finding out like what is your input. The green boxes here are your input. From the input, this yellow boxes are automatically calculated. EAR is basically the effective annual rate. So the bank tells you they're going to give you the loan for 2.5%, but in a sense it is 2.53% because it's monthly compounding. So the way you calculate that is you divide this 2.5% by 12, and then you compound that by 12 periods, 12 months, and then you get 2.5%. So that is automatically calculated in the sheet. Down payments automatically calculated based on your percentage that you will put in here. Mortgage, this is automatically calculated, which is basically the Pmt formula, which says, hey, if you wanted to at this rate 2.53%, if you wanted to have 360 payments, which is basically 2.53 divided by 12, this number here is basically monthly number of rate. At this percentage rate of return, if you had to make 360 payments, which is basically 30 years fixed mortgage, so 30 years fixed is 360 months. So 360 months, if you had to pay at this monthly rate of return, rate of interest for this value of the home, B2, then how much would you have to pay? So I just found an error here. Actually, this should be this payment should be B2 minus the down payment, right? Because you already made the down payment. Okay, so your mortgage will be like 3,966, right? So your mortgage basically, if I hope you got it, which is your monthly rate, which is 0.021. In this case, it is 0.21 percentage. 360 payments, which is like 30 years fixed, and whatever your home price is minus the down payment. So that's basically will easily tell you like what does the bank expect you to pay. The bank expects you to pay, if you were to take a loan of 1.25 million minus the 250,000. So let's say if you take a loan of $1 million, the bank expects you to pay monthly $3,966, which covers the principal and the interest. So when you do that, and to that, if you add your monthly extras, which is your HOA, increase in insurance and property tax, then you get your total payment for the month, which is $6,799. So basically you're paying to buy a home, you're paying $6,799 versus renting, you're paying $4,500, right? So now based on these two, row number 14 and row number 17, it looks like, hey, renting is cheaper, right? But that's not the case because of these increases in rent, and also your equity in your home increases over time. So how do you, and then this is a one-time sales commission we talked about, like the 5% of the home value, right? That you have to pay one time. So how do you with this input, which automatically calculates this, how do you determine if this is a good decision or bad? Prima facie, if you just look at monthly rent and if you look at monthly payment, you're like, hey, it makes no sense, we should just be renting, but that's not true. If we use this concept called net present value in finance, it's basically telling you how much money is this decision worth today. That is NPV. NPV is basically saying, hey, if I were to hold this home for 3 years, right? If I were to buy this home right now at this combination of assumptions, and if I were to hold it for 3 years and then sell it, then I am actually losing $521,000 today. See, that's NPV. And we'll get into right after this what NPV calculation is and how did I get this number. But if I were to hold the same home for 5 years, I'm actually losing $340,000 today. So my decision is bad because it tells you how much money is this decision worth. It's minus 521,000. It's minus 340,000. But if I were to hold the same home for 10 years with these assumptions, actually this decision today will make me richer by 151,000. So see, it depends on the time value of money and how long you hold that the NPV calculation, which tells you, is this a good decision or a bad decision? When an NPV is greater than or equal to $1, then it's actually like greater than zero, anything is good. But when it's negative, that means that, hey, if you were to buy this home for 3 years, it's actually a pretty terrible idea. If you were to buy the same home and not stay there for at least 10 years, right, it's a pretty bad idea. So with these assumptions, and of course, if you change these assumptions, things change. So let's take an example. If I were to say, hey, and we'll get into this, how did I get these numbers very soon, but let's stay with me for now. But if I were to say, hey, my rental cost is no longer this much, my rent's actually like 5,000, then it's actually much better decision. And if I were to say, hey, my rent's gonna actually increase by, let's say, 6%, and my home's actually gonna appreciate by the same 6%. See, the numbers are changing below. If you see here, the numbers are changing. And if I were to say, hey, I can actually bargain this and say I'm going to just give 4%, 2% each time, then this cost changes. If for some reason I think that, hey, my home's actually going to appreciate by 10%, then see this one, this actually like changes decision big time. So based on what your numbers are here, it will change your decisions here. So that's the key. That's the key takeaway, which will tell you like, hey, this is a good deal if you hold in for 5 years with these assumptions. But even if you go moderate, say, hey, 5% each, and if you say, and even if you give this 5% like it was before, and if you buy the same home for like, let's say $1 million, then again, this changes things, right? Or if this interest was 3%, it changes things, right? So how did we get to this calculation, NPV calculation, which is basically net present value, which is basically saying, if I make this decision to buy this home for 3 years, how much money am I gaining or losing? In this case, it says you're losing $406,000, right? Okay, so let's get into NPV calculation. So I have another sheet which copies over everything from this previous sheet here. So do not change this sheet when you're doing this. It automatically copies over from the previous one. So to calculate NPV for, let's say, 3 years, first let's look at how do we calculate NPV for 1 year, right? And then I'll tell you how do we calculate for 3 years below, then I'll tell you for 5 years below, and then I'll tell you how to do 10 years, right? So let's look at NPV calculation for 1 year. Let's say if I were to buy this home for a year with these assumptions and sell it versus if I were to just rent it. So in time 0, I'm actually going to be making this down payment. Remember this down payment? We have to make this down payment, which is $200,000. And we have to also pay this one-time sales commission because we're going to sell it in a year. So if it's $250,000, that's my on year 0. Like right now, I have to have $250,000 in my bank. Again, this changes if you were to say, hey, my sales commission doesn't get added to me as a buyer right now. It only gets added here. Yes, that'll change things. But let's assume for simplicity, your sales commission is already included in time 0. Because that assumption will counter the fact that your HOA will increase, right? So let's assume that your sales on year 0, you have to give $250,000. So your net cash outflow from your bank on year 0 right now is $250,000. Now, in a year from now, you have to pay the next 29 years worth of mortgage that's due, right? And so you find out how much money you have to pay to the bank once you sell the home. You sell the home actually appreciates in value. We see this here, right? In this calculation, it tells you that, hey, the home appreciates by 2.5% or whatever that percent assumptions we have. So the home actually value goes up. So you can actually like sell the home for a higher return, but your bank will still own most of that home. So you have to give money to the bank. You've also paid this much mortgage for a year for 12 installments, and you've probably saved the rental amount. So if you add all of this up, you get still a negative $337,000, because if you sum all of this up, that's your cash flow in year one, which is basically how much money is going in and out of your bank. It's $337,000. So if you then calculate like, hey, what's the value of these two transactions today? Like this is in year 0 right now, and this is in year 1. Then you can do that with an NPV calculation, which basically says, hey, for a cash flow of 337,000 C27, and at this rate of return that we calculated earlier, what is my NPV? NPV, the thing to remember in NPV is that it shouldn't include the first period, which is this one. So then that tells you there's a formula which would automatically calculate in Excel, in Google Sheets. It's called Npv, Net Present Value. Basically, it's telling you, hey, for these series of cash flow, these two cash flows, what is this worth today? Like right now, NPV is like worth today. It's saying, hey, you're losing money big time. Year 0, you're losing 250,000. Year 1, you're going to lose 337,000. And then that 337,000 today's terms plus 250,000 equals 578,000. This is not the summation of these two. If you look at this, summation of these two is 587,000, but the summation of this is actually not the way to look at it. You have to discount this by a year. That's what NPV does. And so you get 578,000. You basically, if you were to buy this home and sell it today, and in a year from now, you're losing $578,000. So that's NPV for a year. So far with me? So now if you were to do the same thing for 3 years, if you were to hold this, stay in this home for 3 years, the year 0 is the same, right? Year 1 is the same, except you will pay a mortgage. You will not sell your home. Your home value doesn't, there's no home value appreciation because you're not selling it until year 3. And you have saved on your mortgage. So your net cash outflow in year 1 is the summation of all of this, which is $7,000. So year 0, you paid 250,000. Year 1, you're going to pay 7,000. Similarly, year 2, again, rent will be increasing, as we saw, based on our rent increase assumptions year by year. But the mortgage gets fixed. So that's the beauty of the home. Your mortgage is going to be fixed throughout. So, and then you have to calculate how much money is remaining for 27 years that you have to pay to the bank, which we can do with present value calculation. Once you do that, you can get the home value, appreciated value for 3 years, right? Which we saw the compounding for 3 years. And the rent you will have to save for third year as well. So if you add all of this up, you get 157,000. So basically your cash flow is still negative. Every year you're losing money. And if you discount all of these 3 to the current year, you can do it using the NPV formula, which basically you start from these 3 cash flows and then add 250,000 to this. So it's basically saying for 3 years, you just lost. If you were to stay in this home for 3 years and sell it, you will lose $406,000. So far with me? Now, let's extend this to 5 years. Same thing, except the NPV formula, it goes from C45 to G45, and then you add this. So then if you were to stay longer, your NPV is getting reduced drastically, right? So it's actually better. It's getting better if you were to stay longer. And similarly, if you were to stay for 10 years, actually you're making $263,000 right now. So that is a huge plus. If you were to stay in this place for 10 years, then you actually made $263,000 today, like right now. Basically, look at this one. There's a negative cash flow all throughout, except in year 4 onwards, as we saw here as well, we saw some positive cash flows. It starts to build up. The positive cash flow starts to build up, and you actually have a much larger positive cash flow in 10 years because your home is appreciated quite a bit. You've saved quite a bit on rents. And so the end result is that your home value has gone up quite a bit. Like if you look at this, you only get 37,000 total cash flow in 5 years from now. But in 10 years from now, you get a total inflow of $600,000. So that's where your NPV becomes much more positive. So hopefully that gives you a detailed understanding of how NPV is calculated and what NPV is. NPV is basically saying, if I have these series of cash flows that are coming in, what is its value today in dollar terms? If NPV is positive, that means it's a good transaction. If its NPV is a negative, it's a bad transaction. So that detailed calculation hopefully helps you to make your own decisions. So you can change this and play around with this, and you will see that quickly it changes the formula will change these numbers. And you can change this as well, saying, hey, you have a higher interest rate, then you can change this. If you think that, hey, the rents are not going to increase as much, then you can change that. And if you think that, hey, my home's actually not going to increase that much, then this is a terrible decision for 3, 5, and even 10 years, right? So these assumptions is critical. I think this is a fair assumption for this apartment. 3%, we just saw how we did historical calculation. 3 is at best, you can get 3. So even if we go by 3.2, let's go by 3.2, even then this is a pretty poor decision. So yeah, so this hopefully helps us make a very clear decision as to whether this is a good decision right now financially or not. But again, the biggest thing is what is your assumption here? Home appreciation and rent increase. If you get these two right, I think everything else is quite static, right? There are a lot of these costs that are not here, which is your HOA increases. What if you had like if you don't take insurance, then there's a bigger problem. But other than that, NPV helps you really understand, if you know the forecast of how the home's going to increase over time and rent's going to increase over time, you can actually calculate, should you rent or should you buy? In this case, it looks like a very clear decision to rent, because even if you look at 3, 5, 10 years, but if you again extend this to like 20 years, maybe this is a much positive number. So it highly depends on your time horizon. But for me, if I were to think of 3 years, then this absolutely is a terrible, terrible decision. I'm actually losing almost $500,000 if I were to decide to buy this home today. Thank you. Feel free to copy this sheet. It's in the description, and play around. You can enter your own numbers, and hopefully you can make your own educated decision.